Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Kyle Graves live again. Sorry about that. I had some streaming issues there. I got cut off. Let's get back to the RFK Tucker Carlson interview that he basically drops a lot of accusations. That Anthony Fauci created COVID in China. Let's get back to it here. Think for yourselves, people. In a lot of ways, it's hard for me to believe a lot of what he's saying. It's interesting, but the thing is, it's like if RFK Jr. could prove a lot of what he's saying is happening, it would be front page on every news organization all over the world. That Anthony Fauci created COVID. And he's responsible. The guy who was, giving us information on how to prevent the spread of COVID was the one who initially created it. So kind of take this with a grain of salt, what he's saying, that it's possibly not true at all. But it is interesting, and, think for yourself. Listen to what he's saying and, do some research and think for yourself.
11 who were trying to block the Patriot Act, and it shut down Congress, and the Patriot Act went through. And and then they told us.
Wait. Really?
Yeah. Yes. And the FBI, after
even Tucker Carlson's like, huh? And that's saying something, right?
a year of investigation, traced the anthrax. It was a kind of Ames anthrax that was weaponized, and the only source of that in the world could be the U.S. government. And they traced it to Fort Detrick in
So the
Maryland.
biolab there.
Yes, the biolab at Fort Detrick.
So here he's about to go into the different biolabs that the American government created, that Anthony Fauci was in charge of, that created COVID and worse bioweapons. But like I said, if he could prove all this, it would be front page of every news organization all over the planet.
The CIA biolab at Fort Detrick. Oh, somebody sent that in at the time the Patriot Act was being debated, and the two leading guys who were blocking it was Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle were the recipients of it. It shut down Congress. The Patriot Act goes through, and what does the Patriot Act do? Two things. I mean, it basically gets rid of a large part of the United States Constitution, Bill of Rights, and allows spying by intelligence agencies on the American people. And it reopens the bioweapons arms race, because bioweapons were shut down in 1969 by, we saw, Nixon did this incredible thing of closing Fort Detrick, shutting them down, and saying we're no longer making bioweapons, and then got everybody to sign a treaty in 73. Well, to ban bioweapons. The Patriot Act has a provision in it that says we're not walking away from the Geneva Convention, which makes it's a hanging offense to develop bioweapons. We're not walking away from the Bioweapons Charter of 1972, 1973, but we are adopting a new rule that any federal official who violates those acts cannot be prosecuted. So it reopened, it effectively got rid of
A crime without a punishment.
Yeah, but anyway, anyway, I forgot where we.
So let me add, it's an interesting segue, because Victoria Nuland kind of blithely announced during congressional testimony last year that, oh, by the way, we have these biolabs in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that was kind of ignored, and the people who covered it got attacked for covering it. But the fact remains there are U.S. biolabs in Ukraine. Why would we have biolabs in Ukraine?
We have biolabs in Ukraine because we're developing bioweapons. And those bioweapons are using all kinds of new synthetic biology and CRISPR technology and genetic engineering techniques that were not available to previous generation. And they can make frightening stuff. What happened was, when we walked away from, when the Patriot Act reopened the bioweapons arms race in 2001, the Pentagon began putting a lot of money into bioweapons, but they were nervous at that time because if you violate the Geneva Convention, it's a hanging offense. And they weren't sure that that provision in the Patriot Act would actually hold up as a loophole to treaties that had been ratified by Congress. So they were nervous about actually going full force into bioweapons development. So they transferred the authority for biosecurity to one agency in the HHS called the National Institute for Infectious and Allergic Diseases, run by Anthony Fauci. So Anthony Fauci got all the responsibility for bioweapons development. He got at that time a 68% raise from the Pentagon in order to do that work. So, and that's why he was the highest paid official in the American government of 4 million people in the American. He gets more money. He got more money, $450,000 a year than the president. That any Supreme Court judge, any member of Congress, he was the highest paid, and it's because he got that 68% raise from the Pentagon to do bioweapons development. Now, when you do bioweapons development, every bioweapon needs a vaccine. So you develop them side by side, because in 100% of the cases when you deploy a bioweapon, there's blowback. Your side also gets sick. So in order to deploy one offensively, you need a vaccine to counter it. So you need to vaccinate your team before you deploy it. So those two things are developed through a field of science called gain of function science, where you take an infectious microbe and you amplify its infectivity, or you make it jump species, so it may kill monkeys, now you make it kill humans, and you adopt it that way. And there's all kinds of methods for that, and then you make it immune to antibiotics and to therapeutic drugs and to other therapies. So it's actually the inverse of medicine. For 2,800 years since Hippocrates, doctors have been trying to figure out how to make microbes less infectious and less deadly, and developed antibiotics and therapeutics to do that. Well, the guys who are involved in this, there's 36,000 what are called life scientists, but they're actually death scientists, who are now employed full-time in developing, microbes that can be used to kill people.
But given the experience we just had 3 years ago, where a virus from a biolab overturned
So let me just finish this brief history about what happened. In 2014, 3 of those microbes escaped. Fauci built labs all over the country, in Galveston and Boston, everywhere. They're BSL-4 labs. We don't even know how many there are, BSL-3 and BSL-4. We have no idea how many there are. There's, we've counted them. I have a new book coming out that goes through the ones we know. But there are many secret ones that people don't know about, and they're doing it here in the United States. But in 2014, 3 bugs escaped from 3 different labs. And they were high-profile breaks, and they were very dangerous things, smallpox and a couple of other bad microbes. The public learned about it, and there was a lot of publicity, and Congress held hearings. 300 scientists wrote President Obama and said, you've got to shut down Anthony Fauci, because he's going to create a microbe that will cause a global pandemic. And so Obama signed a moratorium that shut down the 18 worst of Anthony Fauci's experiments, where most of them were taking place in Galveston and in North Carolina by a scientist called Ralph Barrick down there. And instead of obeying that law, Anthony Fauci shifted a lot of his operations offshore. And those operations ended up, most of them, in the Wuhan lab, which is a military lab.
Oh, yeah, you see Tucker Carlson turn his head right there. He's like, huh? Anthony Fauci moved all of his bioweapons from America to Wuhan? That, I mean, just look at Tucker Carlson's face there, like, what? So, these are some big accusations here by Robert Kennedy, saying that Anthony Fauci created COVID in China, or that he created it here in Galveston and then moved it to China, where it escaped the lab somehow, either accidentally or on purpose. that, you know, killed millions of people worldwide, including, you know, my baby cousin. She was only 23. And it's still around. You know, thousands of people are still getting infected with it, or different variants or whatever. And you know, Robert Kennedy's very knowledgeable on some things, but you know, and sadly we live in a world where it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And the blurred line between reality and fiction, you know, it's like to where, you know, could this is so insane, could it be true? You know, could Anthony Fauci have created COVID and released it? You know, or not him personally, but be responsible, financing and financially, you know, pulling the strings to the lab in Wuhan. Just look at the face on Tucker Carlson.
And that the Chinese run the People's Liberation Army. And then a lot of them went to the Ukraine. So a lot of that science now, and it's funded, not, you know, Fauci was funding lots of it. But then the other government agencies began to get confidence in, you know, their ability to get away with it. And most of it is being funded by the Department of Defense. Most of all, the biggest single funder is USAID, which is, you know, a CIA cutout.
Do you think the lab leak was a leak, or was it intentional?
Well, the best science shows that, indicates that the people who were working on a particular coronavirus technology that was taught by Ralph Baric, funded, it was developed by the U.S. government with NIH money. It was then taught to a group of scientists, Xi Zhengli, who's famous, the Bat Lady, and then her assistant, Ben Hu, and a couple of other scientists at the Wuhan lab. Baric taught them two things. He taught them, one, how to engineer the spike with a furin cleave that could attach to the ACE2 receptors of the human lungs and make people sick and spread, you know, through the air. He taught them another trick that has nothing to do with public health, conceivably, which is a technique called seamless ligation, which is a technique for disguising the evidence of human tampering. So you can make the microbe, and then you can erase the evidence that human beings actually made that microbe. And Ben Hu was leading that research. Ben Hu then got sick with two other of his fellow researchers, and they ended up in the hospital with COVID symptoms in November of 2019. So it appears that Ben Hu, the subway line that goes past the Wuhan lab and goes straight to the airport, all the original cases were along that subway line. And so the intelligence agencies that are actually being honest about that, and most of them are not, believe that Ben Hu and two other researchers got sick that the most likely scenario is that Ben Hu and two other researchers who were working on infectious coronavirus bioweapons got sick and they didn't know it. And so they were riding that subway line every day and infecting people before they actually got symptoms. And that's probably what happened, but nobody knows.
You've said a number of times publicly, many times publicly, and I think it's now been confirmed that CIA had knowledge of, at best, had knowledge of your uncle's assassination.
You know, Tucker Carlson changed. You know, that was a huge segue that Tucker Carlson just made, because he basically just, you know, accuses Anthony Fauci and the United States government of creating COVID at Wuhan. You know, he said regardless of, you know, how, you know, no one knows exactly how it got out, but the fact that it was there was because of Anthony Fauci and the United States government. Very interesting. And, you know, can he You know, if this is true, could this be true? You know, RFK's been through a lot of trauma, and you know the the media specifically, the liberal media, the Democratic Party wants to portray RFK as that he's lost it, that he's gone through severe trauma in his life with the murder of his father and his uncle, who's the president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. That that he's a conspiracy theory nut job. But could what he say be true? I wish Tucker Carlson would have kept asking him questions about this, but he didn't. He just made a huge segue from RFK accusing Fauci and the government of creating COVID in Wuhan, and then he just completely changes subjects to the murder of his father and uncle here. But if he had proof that this is what happened, this would have been all over the news in every single country all over the world. I mean, this would be and the media or the government or whatever, is it a cover up? I don't know. But that was a huge bomb he just dropped. And Tucker Carlson just, nonchalantly just changes the subject. Because even he knows, wow, that was a lot. But maybe he only had him for a specific time frame, and so he was forced to change the subject. But that was a huge transition.
New things, it's still being hidden now. What do you think, and that's obviously true, what do you think the motive was in that killing?
Well, I think the people who were involved in it, the specific people who were involved in it were almost all associated with the Miami station, which was the largest CIA station at that time, and was basically, it was the Cuban station. And the people who were involved in that station were people like Bill Harvey and David Atlee Phillips, who was clearly involved in my uncle's assassination. He was, by all evidence, he was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler at the CIA. And then E. Howard Hunt, who made a...
Here he is. He's also going into another conspiracy, the military involved with the murder of his uncle. And he's done research on this his entire life. But there's some things that the military, the government will keep hidden, just like the thousands of documents, top secret documents that the government still won't release to the public pertaining to the murder of JFK. So, I mean, that right there is fishy enough to know that they're not telling us everything, and they refuse to give all of the evidence for the case of the president of the United States being murdered. And so RFK's gone through a lot in his personal life, more so than most human beings have. And has this affected him psychologically? It would have affected me greatly. I'm not saying what he's saying is not true. But, it comes back to, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Sadly. But in a way that's good, in a way it's bad, because, people who know the system can get away with a lot of wrong. And he's had to experience this firsthand, more so than the majority of people. And it'll be interesting to see going forward this next year, as it is presidential election year. His debates, if he can get a debate with Joe Biden or several other nominees, possibly with Trump, that would be a great debate. RFK versus Trump. I don't know if they'll do that or not. But within just like 5 or 6 minutes of this interview, he just basically breaks it down saying, the United States, whether they purposefully released COVID or not to the planet, that it was the United States government's fault. And I'm going to do another video here after this one about how, in the same interview here, that RFK Jr. declares that the war in Ukraine is purposefully the United States government's fault by forcibly pushing NATO to Eastern Europe, to right there on Russia's doorstep. And this is a very powerful interview. I encourage you to watch the whole interview here with Tucker Carlson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But I will also be making several other videos pertaining to this, to try to chop it up on different subjects, because I wish he would have stayed on the COVID topic, but he didn't. But maybe his time was limited, very limited.
Confession, David Morales, who is the chief hitman. He ran the Operation Phoenix program in Vietnam. He killed 10,000 people, civilians over there, murdered them. And he also gave a confession of being in Dallas. And then there were most of the people were associated with Cuba, and the impetus came from that group of people who were angry at my uncle for not sending an air cover during the Pigs invasion, and then even more so after the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. My uncle then developed this friendship with Khrushchev, and he shut down all of the Cuban attacks by Alpha 66 and these other groups that were harassing Cuba. They were sinking ships, sinking Russian ships. They were operating flotillas out of South Florida and doing raids on. And my uncle and father sent the Coast Guard down to confiscate their boats and their weaponry and to arrest the ones that continued to do it. And those people, those individuals, were also, have been traced and tracked to the assassination, over the years. And they're now. There's been, there's millions of documents. I mean,
but why not release all the documents? What doesn't make sense to me is why not just admit it now? I mean, no one you describe is still alive. There's no living person.
Everybody now, virtually.
So why wouldn't Biden declassify these documents?
I don't know why, and why would Trump not? I
agree. I know why Trump wouldn't, because he was convinced by Mike Pompeo not to. So, and it's not an excuse, but not,
Yeah, but we don't know what Mike Pompeo said to him.
No, but that's the point. Like, what could possibly be
the law requires them to do it. So the JFK assassinations law required that all documents be released by 2017.
Yeah.
And yet they refused. So they.
But it suggests that there's something
about
big
4,000 of them. That are left, and you have to assume. And again, I try not to talk about things that I cannot document.
Right.
But I think it's a fair assumption that they're not protecting individuals; that they're protecting some institutional interests.
So institutions within the United States government were complicit, according to RFK Jr. Institutions like the CIA, the FBI, were complicit in the assassination of JFK. and possibly his father, Robert Kennedy Sr. RFK Jr. has beef with the government. And justifiably so. And basically, in this interview, he declares that the United States government is responsible for the war in Ukraine by consequently dismantling Soviet Russia and then pushing NATO to the east. That the United States government is responsible for COVID by developing it in a lab in Texas and then moving it to Wuhan. And that the United States government was responsible for his uncle's assassination. So, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a threat to the our established order, our established democracy. The government knows this. And so could this possibly be a reason why that they are pushing the media to make him seem like a crazy person? And I don't want to call him crazy. He's been through a lot of trauma. And he might not be crazy. What if everything that he's saying is happened? It would be it's heartbreaking, really, because he's been through so much trauma and he's never gotten any resolve from the murder of his father and uncle. That there's always he's looking for the truth, and then he's searching for the truth also in other areas with COVID and with the war in Ukraine, or just our United States government in general. I'm not saying everything that he believes that he is saying is true, but what if it is? I don't know. He seems, he's way more knowledgeable on all this stuff than I am. I mean, it's fascinating. And, if he could prove all of this stuff, he said he's about to release a book. It's just that will anything, documents or otherwise, bring cold-hearted evidence to support what he's saying? He also did another, RFK Jr. also did another interview with Bill Maher that I encourage you to listen to. I should do a video on that on Club Random, where he goes into, Bill Maher, accuses him of being anti-vax against, the pharmaceutical companies. And he says that he's not specifically anti-vax, but he wants there to be better universal testing on vaccines and medications in general before they're pushed to the public. Like opioids, like OxyContin, like Purdue Pharma manufactured and just pushed out there worldwide, or thousands of people have overdosed on their product. We're coming up with a year of the presidential election, and Robert Kennedy is just, he's making a ton of interview stops, but not so much really on major news platforms. I'm not going to say that they've barred him, but you got to take this interview with a grain of salt, even though it's a good interview. But at the end of the day, Tucker Carlson, it's just another YouTube channel. It's like I would like to see RFK Jr. on 60 Minutes. PBS Frontline. Some mainstream news documentaries or an investigative journalism that, if he can prove this stuff, the American people would like to know. I think it's very interesting, and if you're still here, I don't know if anybody is watching this or not out there. I hope you like and subscribe and share this video, and I hope this inspires people to try to do their own research and to try to not just rely on what is being fed to you. But this is very interesting. I'm going to make another reaction response video to RFK in his accusation against the United States government and their role in Ukraine. And if anyone has a news topic out there that they would like for me to do a reaction response video, let me know. You can put a comment there in the reactions there, the comment section, or you can email me at kjg0623@gmail.com. Americans want the truth, and I think that we can handle it. All right, YouTube. Take care.